This morning when I woke up, the very first thought in my head was, I don't want to what? I don't want to get up. I don't want to do the things that I have to do. I don't want to people. Do you ever have those thoughts, those times when you don't want to do it anymore? You don't want to go through the motions. Maybe they seem meaningless or challenging or difficult. If so, this is for you. I used to work in wilderness therapy, and I had no reason, they shouldn't have hired me. They just shouldn't have. When I started that work, I was over 300 pounds, much like I am today. And I was in the worst shape of my life. I had probably never hiked more than 2 miles ever. And they hired me to guide a group of kids in the woods and keep them safe. And for a while, it was everything in me to just get through the hikes myself. And I remember learning from my co-instructor different techniques for how to take the next step, right? When everything in my body was totally shut down, it was like, I can't do this anymore. The first technique, they said that when you're on trail and you're focused on your feet and you're just trying to take the next step, but you're struggling and every step feels like it's too much, they say look up and find a tree off in the distance a little bit. A tree that you can see. You need to be able to see it. And imagine that there's a rope coming out of your belly button, out of the core of your being, that's tied to this tree. And instead of walking to the tree, allow the rope to draw you in, to pull you to the tree. And this did a few things. It changed your posture. You came up a little bit instead of focused down on the feet. But it gave you a different way to think about the next step. They started to become a little bit more effortless, and you could feel yourself being drawn in, and you could take more steps that way. When you felt like you were exhausted and you had nothing left, with this little imagination exercise, you could shift that. The same thing happens with us sometimes, right? We get so focused on the pain that we're experiencing now, the difficulty that we're experiencing now. We're dreading the next step. When we're in that space, we can look out at something that's just a little bit in the future. We need to be able to see it. It needs to be within our zone of proximal development. But if we can see it, if we can keep our eyes on that thing that's just a little bit out there, and we let it draw us in, we can go a little further. The other thing that sometimes happens is I look out at the big goal. I look way into the future. And in this space, I get overwhelmed by how much was left. So, for instance, in the woods, sometimes I'd be hiking and I'm maybe a mile in and I'm already tired. My muscles are aching. The hill has been really big and I don't know how I'm going to keep going. I know that there's 19 miles left that day. How am I ever going to make it? And I'm overwhelmed by the immensity of the task in front of me. And that puts me in this place where I don't want to do it. I don't want to do this. In that space, when my mind is focused in that way, the other technique that I was taught, it's not to look down at your feet, but to ask yourself, can I take one more step? Right now, do I have it in me to take just the next step? Don't worry about the 20 miles. Can I take one step? And almost always the answer to that question is yeah. Yeah, I could take one more step right now. And then after you take that one, then can I take one step right now? Yeah. Yeah, I can take one step right now. The same thing happens in our life, right? We sometimes get overwhelmed by the immensity of all of the things that we're responsible for. We get overwhelmed by it and we say, I don't want to do it. But if we ask ourselves that question, What's the next right thing? What is don't worry about the long journey. What is the very next thing that I need to do? We'll often find that we can do it. So there's these two different techniques, essentially. When you find yourself, when you wake up like I did this morning, you have to kind of sit with that a moment and say, am I sitting here this morning because I am focused on my feet and the little thing in front of me, and I need to have a goal? I need to have a thing that is achievable. For me this morning, that was the thing. I had so many things. It was so immense. I had to go to my whiteboard and I had to write down what are all the things. And I had to put them into days and say, okay, Saturday I could do this one and Sunday I can do this one. And I had to break that up into tasks. And then I said, okay, well, what's the next one? What is the one that I need to do right now? What's the most important one, but is achievable? And by putting that little goal, by attaching to that one tree, that's not the whole journey. I'll have to attach to another tree once I reach that one. But it helps me go a little further. But sometimes it's not for lack of a goal. It's just so tired that the very next step, how do I even take that? And then I have to ask that question. Can I do just the next thing and not worry about the whole journey? Can I not be overwhelmed? So, 2 techniques. I hope that you find them helpful. There are times when these techniques don't work, where we look out for the tree ahead, but we feel aimless. Or we ask ourselves, can I take the next step? And the answer is no. I don't have the energy to take even the very next step. In those situations, if you find yourself in one of those places right now, I want to encourage you to reach out to a therapist. There are times where we need help, where we need someone else to come behind us and support the weight of life. There are other times where what we need is a listening ear. And we live in a world where people don't listen well. I'm a spiritual director. My work, my vocation is to sit with people and listen. And I want to invite you down in the description below. There is a place to schedule a consultation with me. My caseload is usually full, but even when it is full, I still take consultation sessions, and these times are for you. They're not for me to sell to you or to try to convince you to work with me in a spiritual direction context. It's just a time for me to listen to your story and answer any questions that you might have. And so if you find that you're in this place where you need a listening ear, you need somebody to just hear you, I want to invite you to book one of those sessions, and in the comments, write, I just need a listening ear. If you make that comment in there, I'm not going to try to upsell you into spiritual direction. I'll just listen. Just be somebody that can hear you, because sometimes to fully live, to be fully alive, we need to be heard.